Welcome to this presentation of Lexington Theological Seminary's Conversation on Stewardship and Finances project. This project is funded by the Lilly Endowment Incorporated as part of its Theological School initiative to address economic challenges facing future ministers. As part of the Conversations on Stewardship and Finances project, Lexington Theological Seminary partnered with the Christian Church in Kentucky to conduct research to understand the implications of bivocational ministry on the choices and financial viability of clergy and congregations. My name is Kris Bentley and I'm the project director, and I'm happy to be able to share a few stories of the bivocational solo pastors who participated in the research project. The research project involved two stages. In the first stage, we conducted a web-based survey where both single and bivocational ministers participated. And in the second stage, we conducted semi-structured interviews with 10 of the bivocational ministers who were solo pastors. The stories I'll be sharing come from 4 of the 10 solo pastors who participated in the second stage of our research. When our research advisory team assembled, one of our first questions was, what do we mean when we talk about bivocational ministry? And our group spent some time asking ourselves what bivocational ministry meant to us. We also did some reading about bivocational ministry. We found that many different terms are used across the span of various Christian traditions. You may see some familiar terms listed here. When we spoke with some who were serving as bivocational ministers, they told us one thing clearly. They did not think the term part-time ministry was a good way to describe their ministry. The research team developed its own working definition to use in the research. We wanted to include people who were licensed, commissioned, or ordained. Their other employment could be part-time or full-time. This definition was shared widely before we began our research. For more than 10 years, the Christian Church in Kentucky has observed a growing number of congregations which intentionally call bivocational ministers, that is, clergy, whom the congregation expects to hold some kind of employment in addition to the ministry to which they've been called by the church. Lexington Theological Seminary also knows that many of our students will likely be bivocational ministers after they graduate. So the seminary and the Christian Church in Kentucky wanted to know more about the experiences of those called to this ministry in order to better prepare them academically and support them more effectively in ministry. The first step in the research project was the web-based survey fielded in 2015. Through the survey, much has been learned about ministers, including about how they are being compensated, and about household income, and about debt. Much also has been learned about congregational practices concerning finances and stewardship. We had a good response from both single and bivocational ministers. This slide tells you a little bit about who took the survey and our response rate. 40% of the survey respondents did identify themselves as bivocational ministers, so it allowed us to make some comparisons between single and bivocational ministers. The second part of our research involved semi-structured interviews with 10 bivocational solo pastors who also had responded to the web-based survey. We interviewed these pastors along with 2 lay leaders from each of the congregations they served. The interviews lasted approximately an hour with the pastor and an hour with the lay leaders. They spoke about their congregational practices, about what they thought made their congregations unique, about church finances, and compensation of the pastor. In addition, the pastors shared their stories of call to congregational ministry. In this presentation, I'm sharing a little bit more from a few of these interviews. One of the themes in many of the interviews had to do with the connection to community. One of the pastors who reflects this theme has served for more than 28 years as the pastor of a small rural congregation in western Kentucky, while also teaching in a middle school in the next county. At the time of the interviews, he had been serving as a substitute teacher after retiring from full-time teaching. He grew up in the next county and was part of a very small rural church. During childhood and his teen years, he was very active in the church, even helping lead worship. Eventually that congregation closed. However, he continued to be active in local congregations. One of the regional ministers encouraged him to consider becoming a licensed lay minister. He took that path and served in several places. He did not attend seminary. When his current congregation was looking for a pastor nearly 30 years ago, it was small and knew it needed a minister who would be able to afford to work for lower pay. Through the years, the congregation has fluctuated in numbers, but now it is growing again. He and the congregation have a very strong relationship with their local community. This pastor considers his ministry and vocation to extend beyond congregational ministry. The centrality of connection to community in the congregation's ministry includes significant outreach and neighborhood development. The annual Blessing of the Hunt at the beginning of deer hunting season, and their annual wild game dinner. This pastor was called out of the local community, and as a bivocational solo pastor, he has also nurtured a strong connection to the community. Another theme we identified from our conversations with bivocational pastors and congregational leaders is that bivocational ministry can be a key support in a new mission effort. The congregations served by one of the pastors interviewed was a new church start, meeting in a rented house. The pastor and the lay leaders interviewed identify their congregation as being a light in their community. However, they have experienced significant financial stress. Their bivocational pastor expressed her sense of a strong call to be with them, and she has been serving sacrificially in terms of pay. The congregation leaders really see themselves as a team, pastor and congregation. Yet there are many pressures when money is tight, and both the people and the pastor wonder about the future. The lay leaders of this congregation asserted that they could not be doing what they are doing without this pastor. And because everything is so new, they experience a level of uncertainty about their future. The pastor is willing and able to do this ministry thanks to her other employment that is secure and provides needed health benefits. Before going to seminary, she says she always expected to be bivocational. In addition to her steady employment outside the congregation, her freelance writing is an added element that gets both the pastor's name and the congregation's name out in the community a little bit. Another theme we heard from the solo pastors we interviewed is that their other employment makes them a better minister. This pastor, who is also a potter, says that, and he refers to it as a kind of joy. He was a single vocation pastor for more than 20 years and then moved to this new setting. And during this time he also has established himself as a local potter, and he has a studio in his home. He said that he absolutely loves being bivocational. He says that he has experienced a more collaborative relationship with the congregational leaders than in previous settings. He attributes some of this to being bivocational and having well-defined boundaries and expectations. He also finds the pottery work brings him a different creative outlet in his life. The congregational leaders agree. They have had bivocational pastors previously. With this particular pastor, they seem to appreciate his experience in congregational ministry. And they also said they love the way people see their pastor at local art fairs where he is selling pottery and where people get to hear about their church. This pastor attended seminary in his 30s after several years in another profession. And then he also returned to seminary to complete a DMin degree. He's also an accomplished musician and vocalist. The congregation leaders love that too. One of the 10 pastors we interviewed articulated explicitly something that others alluded to, that bivocational ministry can provide a sense of freedom. It is this particular pastor's first experience with bivocational ministry after serving more than 10 years in single vocation ministry with larger congregations. This pastor admits he never had considered bivocational ministry when in seminary. He had sensed a call to ministry in college and then went straight to seminary after college. And after graduating from seminary, he served as an associate minister for a number of years and then as a senior pastor. Then he virtually dropped out of ministry, exhausted, worn out, and possibly disillusioned. After leaving congregational ministry, he found employment outside of the church. And at the time of the interview, he was working full-time with a health management company. He returned to congregational ministry after a conversation with the regional minister, who told him about a congregation that was looking for a bivocational pastor. The congregation had had previous bivocational ministries, so they knew what they were doing. The bivocational experience has been great for this pastor and congregation. The pastor calls it a healing experience. And part of what this pastor identifies as key is that there's a sense of mutual respect between the pastor and the congregational members. He imagines this is part of the strength of bivocational ministry in general. Here's a quote from this pastor that articulates what he has observed. "I didn't anticipate, but rather enjoy, that being bivocational carries some advantages for the pastor. The fact that most of my income comes from outside the church frees up money for the church to do other things. Also, having other income gives me the freedom to have a more prophetic voice within the congregation." Our conversations with these pastors and lay leaders have indicated that bivocational ministry is not a barrier to good pastoring. The interviewees felt strongly that being bivocational created space for a very fulfilling and special relationship between the pastor and the congregation. In short, they felt that because the pastor did not rely on the congregation for livelihood, the pastor was empowered to engage with the congregation on equal footing. Thank you for taking time to hear about what Lexington Theological Seminary is learning from its research concerning bivocational ministry.